This webinar is part of the 4 Million Homes programme that we and PPCR are delivering over the next 2 years, funded by the Department for Levelling Up Homes and Communities. And please do feel free to tell your friends and neighbours about the session, about the 4 Million Homes programme, and encourage them to attend future sessions. Today, we're going to be focusing on issues that are of particular relevance to leaseholders. We'll be looking at service charge, billing and calculation, major works consultations and recharging, subletting, building safety compliance, and other issues as we go along. I'm Blaise Lambert. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Confederation of Co-operative Housing. I'm going to be hosting the session today. We have 3 speakers lined up for you. The first speaker will be Mark Plummer from the Department for Levelling Up Homes and Communities, followed by his colleague Jules Masters, and then David Ailes from the Leaseholders Association of Southwark, who's a leaseholder himself, will be speaking and answering any questions that you may pose to him. I'm going to introduce our first speaker today. Mark Plummer is the Head of Service Charge Reform at the Department for Levelling Up Homes and Communities, and he's going to be giving an initial overview of social housing leaseholder and shared owner key issues, including discussion about good practice and things that maybe don't work quite so well.
As Blaise said, I'm going to be giving a quick chat on service charges and major works. I'm very much here in a listening exercise, and the reason I'm here in listening exercise is because not only are we very aware of service charge issues facing leaseholders, but there's been a lot of press speculation about government ambitions to reform leasehold, and the Secretary of State has committed or rather stated that he's due to bring forward leasehold reforms this Parliament. And by this Parliament, we read by the general election and not by the King's speech on the 7th of November. So let's just go back to the beginning. Clearly, we all know service charges are recoverable from leaseholders in return to services to maintain, manage, repair, insure, and in some cases improve the building. And we know that there are many different arrangements set out in the market at the moment, particularly fixed service charges in some cases. And by fixed, it means fixed for the whole accounting period, not fixed in perpetuity, whereas the majority clearly are variable service charges. And as mentioned above, some leases allow for the cost of improvements to be recovered, but others do not. And I think that's raised its head recently, particularly in the context of building safety issues. But I think the government's position on all this is clearly, leaseholders should only be charged in line with the terms of the lease, and that charges should be reasonable. But we believe very strongly that service charges should be transparent, communicated effectively, and if things do go wrong or you don't understand, there is a clear route to challenge or redress. And we've spoken to stakeholders in the past and looked at various research reports, and we say, that a number of landlords do indeed demonstrate good practice and provide evidence and relevant information. And with the coming forward of different software systems, some landlords are actually, flexing the package and can make available a lot of relevant information. But we are aware, and it's very interesting that the poll reveals this, that too many landlords are not providing enough information and critically not enough clarity to leaseholders. Next slide, please. And here are some of the examples that we have. First of all, you're being charged too much. You are not getting value for money. There is a risk that you're being charged for works that your lease does not require you to pay for. And again, the other one is a clear lack of understanding. and that's all about the real, as you mentioned, the lack of information. And we do recognise that there are some statutory protections for leaseholders, both in terms of the ability to challenge the reasonableness of costs, your right to summary of costs and to inspect documents, and of course the summary of rights and obligations that must accompany every service charge demand. But there is some evidence, and particularly from Law Best Working Group report and from the Housing, Communities and Local Government Select Committee, as it was then before we had our latest name change, they all reported the fact that there were issues. And I think it's very clear the fact that the existing statutory requirements do not quite go far enough to address this. And this is something that government may be looking to address as part of the forthcoming reforms. Next slide, please, Helen. And then, of course, the other issue that's been particularly relevant in recent years is the existing major works process, the infamous Section 20 process, where again we have it's been in place now for over 20 years under its current form. The threshold is accepted as what, £250 before this engagement process must be engaged, or the landlord must apply for dispensation. And it's a bit like the curate's egg. It works in some parts. That's what the feedback we've received, but it doesn't work in other parts. And I think some of the issues are, as set out on the screen there, it's too complex. Some people think it's a waste of time. Others think that you don't get the right level of information to make a decision on A, whether the works are done, and B, the adequacy of the contractor that the landlord wants to employ. And I think probably one of the biggest ones is the fact that there is a clear inability to plan, so you don't get sufficient notice, particularly if you get a larger bill, for example, a roof replacement or so on. That you get given a very short space of time, as in a very few number of months, in order to find quite a large sum of money. So what I would like to do now is I've actually got a few questions on the next slide, and I would really welcome if we just went through, or people felt that they would like to put up their hand or write in the chat the answer to some of these questions. Helen, if that's all right, if we could go on to the next slide. So I'm really very interested to understand about what, especially given you think it's inadequate, the level of information adequate, what the landlord does provide you, and how responsive they are to giving you the relevant information, and critically, what can government do? And then when it comes to the major work process, it'll be useful to understand what you like and dislike about the process, and what more, again, government could do.
Yes, so I'm Jules, and just a little bit of clarity on when we say residents, we cover residents of any tenure, so that includes leaseholders. And remediation projects refers to building works carried out which aim to address fire risks in buildings, often through removal or replacement of a building's cladding, and that's stemming from Grenfell, and removing cladding or other works to mitigate the issues to do with that. Our job and my team is to improve the experiences of residents who will or are undergoing remediation of their buildings and homes, and we aim to make sure that their experiences, as far as possible, are good ones. Though we understand that the impacts can be very significant of these works, and often are quite significant works. So as a team, we work across all the different ways buildings can be remediated, and oversee and work to improve the way all these remediation projects account for residents. But that said, we're always keen to
We're about to get the answer now. This is the moment of truth. Let's go in.
I'm sorry, Graham. We're getting a lot of background noise from your speaker.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you.
And also just to say, we're always keen to hear about the experience of residents, both good and bad ones. So a bit more now on what we actually are doing. So as Blaise said, on the 27th of July, we published a code of practice for the remediation of residential buildings, which we'll provide a link for after this event. There's also a separate guidance page aimed at condensing the code down into what it means for residents specifically. So if you're short on time, you can have a look at that as well. And in short, the code sets a standard for how we, as government, expect all remediation projects that we're overseeing to account for residents. It applies to anyone involved in a project and responsible for them. And it's about everyone involved understanding the impacts that these projects can have on residents and the expectations on them to account for these impacts and their residents. So as a resident, throughout the project, you should be informed and know where to get more information, be engaged and be able to ask questions and raise issues, and have your lives considered with steps being taken to ensure a livable environment for all. Essentially, you should feel that you are seen by the project and the people running it as a key stakeholder, and that they're delivering for you and will work with you, specifically on the issues with how the project's being run. For us, the code is a major first step, and we're now looking at how we can make sure that projects and residents are aware of, understand the code, and how residents can be accounted for by projects, and that residents have a voice in remediation, and that us as government continue to understand the resident experience and whether or not the code is being complied with in practice. We are, to support this, we're developing a number of supporting materials, so include messaging and communication on the code and the resident experience, guidance for residents and industry, and how feedback from residents and their experiences of remediation can regularly be collected and acted upon. If you're interested in being a part of developing this work, then please do email me and I'll provide my email after this event, and also some more information on the code as well.
Okay, title page, playground rules. Yeah, unfortunately, and very sadly, some people we will be dealing with treat it like this and treat us like we are children as leaseholders. So we need to be aware of that. And like playgrounds, if you roll on to the next slide, please, we need to make sure we don't get emotionally involved, because that's one of the biggest issues that can cause damage. I am a right to buy a leaseholder, and been in my present property for since the first opportunity. It was bought with my parents in Southwark. Last 2000 is next slide please, is a voluntary organisation that is set up by leaseholders for leaseholders. In Southwark, we are the only organisation that is totally self-funding, and we don't take a penny off the local council, because we feel that if we did, then that would undermine our ability to confront them if we need to. We found as an organisation that by having a membership, by trying to get groups of leaseholders in blocks together to talk and work together, the strength is in the numbers, not necessarily in your rights or wrongs. It's actually the numbers, because there is a hell of a lot of work in anything you do with the councils or the landlord, and it's very, very frustrating. So you need the support mechanism there so that you can talk to each other, and you need the backup, and you need the fire and the hotspur to actually get stuff done. And eventually, if you're by yourself, you get worn out. It drives you to distraction. So the important thing is to understand your rights and responsibilities, and also understand then, if we roll on to the next slide, do your homework, read your lease properly. I am appalled by how many leaseholders I talk to and residents that actually have never read it, do not understand their leases, and haven't read the information. And I've read a lease recently with a Church of England property, and the poor gent had the responsibility of replacing the roof of a church in Oxford, even though they lived in London. So you've got things like that in your lease, so you may be surprised. You also may be surprised that the council can charge you for changing your bathroom. You know, knowledge empowers you. So the more information you've got about your lease, and don't be afraid when you know, if to go back to your conveyancer and say, could you re-explain this, please, and ask them to explain it. It's worth the money to get somebody to, if you don't understand it, to explain it, and highlight in big red pen what it's going to cost you, or where the costs possibly could be. Next slide, please. This is probably the horriblest slide of them all. Unfortunately, landlords do have constraints. It's sometimes budget, where they just run out of money because of mismanagement. It's also some practical consideration because of fire regulations, and Katie's mentioned that a few times already. And some of those constraints are because they can't do it, or there's all sorts of reasons. And then, unfortunately, if you're a local authority resident, you got the worst one, which is the political one. Because if your local council have a political agenda that affects you as a leaseholder, you will get caught by that as well, because that will drive how the council officers deal with you. And that is the problem. If they are entirely cash generation officers and they've got to get a budget and they've got to get a figure, you will fill that through the political drive and support they get from your elected officers. And the same is if a council is new property driven, you will be surprised to see how many leaseholders will get totally ignored. So if they are health and safety conscious and want your vote, then that's the time to start and pick on them to get things changed for you, which is the important thing. If you go to the next slide, please. On a very, could do next slide if possible. I'm very aware of the issues that have been raised in the comment section. And I'm not going to be able to cover all of the incidences that people have said. And I hope this is a little bit of a glimpse that will help a little bit. So when people say to you, and the council say to you, and the landlord say to you, well, you can take legal advice as necessary. As soon as they say that word necessary, you go get legal advice instantly, because every single time it is necessary. You need to get proper specialised advice for leaseholders matters, not just your high street man, unless they're a complete expert. But this is a minefield, and we and you can get out of depth really quickly. And because it becomes emotional, you're not always hearing what people are saying to you. So you need to step back, and you need to hear sometimes the bad news. Yeah, agree with you. You know, the bad news that sometimes you're going to get, because then you can budget and then you can manage that, or manage the exit conversation with the council. yeah, people will say to me, oh no, I don't get emotional about it. You do every time. I've been in the leasehold organisation with people for more years than I want to admit, and I've had personal leasehold issues, and every single time I get emotional about it. And because it's my pocket, my home that's being affected, they don't have to live in it. I do. And I was one of the speakers at Grenfell because I was in a leasehold fire in a property, and I watched my own family being carried out of a property, a light. And I will, to this day, will always smell that smell. So when I had to deal with the local council regarding the fire situation, I couldn't do it. I had to ask my partner to take over because I was in a little pile of mess on the floor, even though this was many years after the event. And it does get emotional. The other thing about going to a proper qualified solicitor is that they are insured to get it wrong. If we and you make a mistake about reading your lease or understanding what process got to be taken, you can't sue yourself for that mistake, but you can go against your solicitor or the conveyancer that never advised you properly when you bought the property in the first place. You must get proper qualified advice, please. Next slide, please. So have I. You're right there, lovely. Right. Self-obvious. If you can do all those things, then very kind, the officers and the people involved at the lower levels will be more inclined to help you. We found in last 2000 that being not groveling, but being respectful and listening to what they say and listening to what constraints they may have actually helps, because then you can ask the question in a different way and you may get something out of them. Next slide, please. Right, communication. Now, at this stage, hopefully you must do everything in writing. You must have it logged at every single stage. There's videos, you can take photographs with stamps on it. You must record everything that you can, absolutely everything. If you've got other leaseholders in your property or in the building or other residents, they're going to have the similar problems under Section 20 as you. So talk to them, go knock on their door, see if they would work together with you, with your local tenants association, or LAS 2000 if you're in Southwark. In other boroughs, they've got their other leaseholder groups. Go talk to them, get them to work with you to talk and get the information, because it is really, really important that you take detailed pictures. I've been with somebody that took a video of a roof. They were able to nip on the scaffold. I don't know how they did that. And they actually did a before and after video of every single centimetre of this roof. And they were able to show it and challenge the council because the people that did the roof didn't repair it. So we found that the other part of information is that you are able to use freedom information. There are websites out there that will help you log that, which is really, they're very, very useful. And they send you reminders when you need to have done the next step. But what you must also understand, the immediate moment you talk to a council officer, very technically, that is a freedom of information request, because you are talking to them and asking them information. Make sure that everything you do, I add that at the end of a question emails to the council every time, okay, every single time, so that we can get responses. It is another layer of hard work, but it works. And when you get the nitty gritty, you can get more information. There's plenty online about that, so I'm not going to egg this situation. If next slide, please. Right. Is if you this is probably the most important slide. You must include the other leaseholders. You must work together to deal with any of the queries. And some people know you want to not deal with it, but that's, you know, what they want to do. You need to respect what they want. But the more you can get involved to deal with the one problem, and if you can speak with one voice and form a group or committee to deal with the issues, the stronger you are. It is also a numbers game, and that also means you share the burden of issues. Next slide, please. This is stuff that is, I'm not going to insult you, but these are all things you need to ask a question about and try and do. And it's very difficult. It is very difficult when you're faced with a silly bill. You know, I helped in a meeting where there was a resident of Southwark that was charged the single highest service charge bill in the country. It was over £180,000 for one service charge for one piece of work. And trying to negotiate reasonably when you've hit with 25 leaseholders were hit with a bill of that size is very difficult, and it was very emotional. And unfortunately, council weren't prepared to listen to the solutions they had, but it was dealt with, unfortunately, through solicitors. But again, it was the numbers that all could contribute to get, they all added to a little fund that went towards them getting proper, decent legal advice. Next slide, please. This is how I try and start when I deal with my landlords, is trying to get a positive relationship with them. And that does help for some of our members that have got a difficult relationship, because I've got a positive relationship with some of the council officers. We're able to help that way. But starting off on the upper hand is always a good start. And unfortunately, the other thing you don't want to happen is to cause the officer to personally take what you're saying as a personal affront, because they will unfortunately keep it personal all the way down the line. And that means the way they deal with you won't be as good as they deal with other people. The bias that they can show can be quite horrific. And I've unfortunately witnessed that through other leaseholders. Next slide.
David, you're muted.
Yeah, I've said this a few times, so please, you know, listen to the legal advice, even if it's negative. it isn't, unfortunately, because they go by the letter of the law, it isn't personal unless you've made it personal. So don't, you know, our bruised prides will always cost us money. So that this is probably, unfortunately, not the best thing to have to advise people, because we don't always want to hear the bad news. Next slide, please. Right, we can, I'm just trying to get a little bit of a more light-hearted comment before I went on to the next thing called leasehold consultation, but we can go straight into the next slide, please. This is probably the one thing you need to understand. The words that are used in leases and the words that are used under leasehold issues and mortgages aren't common day-to-day English. They don't have the same dictionary meaning as some of the words we use in day-to-day life. And the biggest offender of that is the word consultation, the landlord's consultation. It actually means, for most council residents, they're telling you. Not we're talking to you or listening to you, we're just telling you. This is what it is. Told you, we've just complied with our bit under section 20. We've just ticked it. Thank you, bye-bye. Unfortunately, that way of doing things has become more and more popular. It's absolutely horrific the way some landlords get away with that. But on the other side, you will get some of the housing associations that actually do consultation properly. They may not listen to you at the end of it, but they at least give you the opportunity to do it properly. Certainly the ones I've been involved with, Blaze with, that was done properly and was listened to. So, you know, it's really difficult because you sometimes just have to take what they're telling you. One of the, well, more than one, three of the local councils I've dealt with in the last 20 years, when they have a section 20 meeting and consultation with you, they have two officers, one to deal with the telling you what the section 20 is going to do and what they're going to propose, and the other one is asking you how you're going to pay the bill and giving you payment options. That is not consultation, but it's what they do, and it's horrific and it's horrible. So and it becomes emotional, very, because it's very intimidating, and that's one of the things that should never happen. Next slide, please. Okay, there are other forms of consultation, and you just got to remember, even though they're really nice and they sound like they're talking to you and listening to you, they're actually not. They're running a process. I dealt with a local council where we had a consultation. The legal aspect had a running time limit, which they then provided the particular group with a consultant to help them with their consultation process, but they failed to tell them that they had 14 days to respond. They had meetings, they had planning, they had lovely pictures of the event, and 35 days afterwards, the consultant turned around and said, oh, by the way, it's too late for you to oppose the applications. Was it done on purpose, or was it a good gesture by the landlord? That's up to you to decide, but I certainly know what it was. Next slide, please. Okay, remember, try and work with them if you can. Clear communication from you at least is important. try and make sure they adhere to the lease, and so do you. But your situation is unique to you. So you need to make sure that you work with the people in your block, in your properties, to deal with each circumstance. The law isn't always with you, but most of the time it is. So use it, but use the people around you within your group to work together. You know, that's the thing I've got to say about most of this. If you do it on your own, it is a nightmare. You will not have enough time in the day to sort out all the issues you get, because the Section 20s can come year after year, and the service charges certainly will come year after year. And even they need to be looked at very carefully and scrutinised properly. So thank you very much for listening to me, and hope the noise in the background weren't too bad.